Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mad in Germany. We are in a different studio this time, and I am joined by Alice Hasters, best-selling author and of what white people should hear about race but don't want to, as well as identity crisis, which you see behind me. So welcome to the podcast, Alice. So where we are today, we're actually quite close to Alexanderplatz. And 5 years ago, more or less, there was this huge demonstration that you describe quite vividly in your book. A lot of people came out to demonstrate for Black people's rights in Germany, for equality, inspired by Black Lives Matter demonstrations across the world. I want to ask you, do you think anything has changed since then for the better?
Well, it's not a linear thing. I think many things have changed for the worse, or at least they haven't gotten better. But there is like a certain, let's say they have gotten better for a certain class of people. I had a conversation with a different person the other day, and we're two Black Americans actually talking, and then he said, well, he's a filmmaker, and he said, well, after 2020 and the discussions, sure, my life got better. People in my workplace are more aware of what to say and what not to say, and kind of like maybe don't ask me inappropriate questions anymore. But my cousin's life in America, who drives a truck, hasn't changed for the better. So there's, I think, and I don't want to discredit the positive change for, like, I guess, a more privileged class. I think that is also progress, but it hasn't reached, I think, the people who maybe need change the most.
There was, two cases in the last year that got a lot of attention. There was Mohamed Drameh last summer and Lawrence A. like a month or so ago. And I would say, at least with Lawrence A., there was at least quite a bit of push. There was quite a lot of protests organized by the family members and stuff. So in a sense, it's better we're discussing that, right? But obviously very tragic cause for that discussion.
I would even argue that I feel like Mohamed Drameh didn't get that much of attention, especially when it happened in 2022. I mean, now I feel like with Lawrence, it gets attention again, like people, and I'm very, and of course it's not, like, there's no comparison to how many people came out for George Floyd in 2020 in Germany versus how many people come out for Lawrence now. But that said, I feel like I was very, in a way, that was a little bit of a glimmer of hope for me, that so fast there were like initiatives in Oldenburg where Lawrence was shot that took on, like, they organized, they networked with other activists who also, like, where in other places where people have been victims of police brutality, they kind of like, I feel like the organizational part and the educational part, they kind of like also educated the people. That worked fairly well. But if you look at, and the media picked up on that story, but still there's like, I feel like there is a little bit of a lack of where to go with that discussion, because then people kind of like still misunderstand it in a way of like, was the policeman who shot Lawrence racist? Like, was he actively being racist? You will never find that out. And secondly, this is not what we're talking about. This is not how racism or structural racism works necessarily. And it's not that the policeman has to think this is a Black man, and like, you will never have that articulated in that way. But if you see who is dying, who is seen as aggressive, why was he seen as like as a threat that had to be taken out in that way, and why was there no kind of like inner incentive for the policeman to kind of like stop after one shot, like that? These are the questions that are that kind of like points to that there's a bias. And I feel like that people in Germany still don't really get how that works, because they kind of like, then you might have a hearing and then people conclude, oh no, but the policeman, he wasn't racist. He says he is not racist, and there's also no sign that he never wrote down, I hate black people.
Yeah.
And then,
And if he did, then it was just a joke, right?
yeah, or that is just like, because, yeah, even if there would be obvious evidence, people are still.
But do you think that's maybe because in Germany people have a very kind of subservient approach to power and state power? And that's something that's not even necessarily linked with racism, because I see, I report a lot from pro-Palestine demonstrations. There was one last week that was very brutal. Obviously, there's the racialized element there as well. And I would like to hear your perspective on that. But also, there's plenty of white women getting punched in the face by these big, aggressive male cops, which we should say cops were also injured. But yeah, I wonder, if it's too hard to question actually the institution of the police and how violent and the state inherently, right?
I feel like people are very scared to. Yeah, I feel like there's a point there, and the police as part of the state. I feel like, I don't know. In general, I think a lot of people in Germany really don't want to turn on the police. Basically, they think like, oh, but they are the good ones because the state is the good actor and stuff.
Yeah.
So
that's really baffling to me, because Germany is the country where that the state can be more oppressive than anywhere else, right? And this Erinnerungskultur, it's like, okay, there was this point, I think, made online. I'm trying to remember. There was this point made online, like, how can we have these demonstrations the same day that Margot Friedländer is being buried, right? And so Margot Friedländer is this Holocaust survivor. She was honored by the Bundestag, and her family were murdered by the Nazis. Like, who took away her family? It was probably the German police.
But you see with Margot Friedländer, for example, you see how every politician, everyone was agreeing that Margot Friedländer was a good person, and they have all these, like, they've met her, they've shaken hands. Like, everybody was mourning Margot Friedländer. But there is a difference between, like, a lot of people in Germany are not able or straight up unwilling to connect the past with the present. That is basically, I mean, this is what
we're different now.
Yeah,
that couldn't happen.
That is very important to them. It's not so. Erinnerungskultur, remembrance culture, is not necessarily there to kind of like. It has this performance of like, oh, so this prevents us from doing it ever again. But it's also kind of like, it also has this function of kind of like saying, oh, we're different now. We're not these people anymore. We're
whitewashing.
Yeah, and there's a like also kind of like you can't have a continuation. You can't have a like through line with German identity or German or structure or anything. This is just like, it's kind of like something that is haunting the Germans. Like, they're so afraid of allowing the idea that there are things from the Nazi times that are still persist and lingering today, that we still have to do the work of undoing, unlearning, kind of like, opening up. And I think this is why people are even extra unwilling to kind of like let these suspicions or these like the critical perspective on to the police, like if they don't want to see it, and then it's gonna, and everyone knows that if you kind of like suppress a thought or a perspective or a criticism that is obvious and that is justified for too long, it's going to kind of like come out in a radical form at some point.
And do you think that's what's happening with the AfD, the rise of the AfD? Because they're now, the most popular party in Germany. And I feel like they're just saying stuff that a lot of other people have been suppressing or not wanting to say.
Yeah, I mean, there are
a different tone.
I kind of like with Trump and the AfD, and probably it's true with many right-wing parties around the globe. I feel like they ask the right questions and they give the wrong answers, kind of. So,
what do you mean by that?
So I feel like they speak to obvious dissatisfaction with that is there in society. Like, where this dissatisfaction comes from is now the question. Like the AfD says, oh, because all these migrants came and because we are not like a nation anymore. Globalization kind of like ruined our culture, and now we're kind of losing ourselves and stuff. That is their answer. And I think you could also say, yeah, because there's a growing disparity of wealth. There's like, even though there is more wealth accumulation, not many people are benefiting from it. There is technology that is rapidly changing our society and our world. We could have that conversation, these answers, but the question of like, why are we feeling this way? Like, why do we feel shitty, basically? That is something that the AfD and also Trump kind of like identified as something that people want answers to. And they have the advantage that they can provide under complex, untrue answers, that are just easier to digest.
Yeah, but I also feel like they just have a slightly different tone than the rest of the political class in Germany, one which actually people maybe understand a bit more, just from a simple perspective of like, understandability, comprehension, like they don't try and sound grand and academic. They sound kind of angry and give simple solutions, and people want that, and maybe people want that from the left as well.
I think so. I feel like I also find it so interesting because it's not that I don't feel like that a lot of people who vote for AfD or anything, that they're not trying to get information. They're like listening to hours and hours of podcasts. They're
Telegram, chat groups.
Exactly. Yeah. So there is this feeling that they feel informed. It's like a lot of disinformation, but they kind of like consume a lot of information. Yeah. So I think it's kind of interesting that it doesn't really work to kind of like, there is a curiosity. There is I think a kind of like need to find answers and context. And I find it so interesting why it's so hard for the left to provide those answers. But it's also that, now we see that the left is gaining traction again. But for a long time, I feel like
it was seen as very academic, right?
Academic, but there was a time, and maybe that's me as a journalist, but like, I feel like when I entered journalism, I went to journalism school in 2014, graduated in 2016, and I feel like in these times there was like really a motivation for educational content on the internet, like Vox.com. We're trying to explain everything, like trying to give context for everything, and it was working to some extent, I would say, but also maybe not enough. And maybe I think we underestimated, the alternate, like Breitbart and all these actors. They just
news in Germany.
Yeah.
Right? They're newer, but
exactly. But they're trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. And I feel like, I don't know, I'm almost skeptical of the idea of education. Maybe this is a bad thing to say as a journalist, but I'm skeptical about the role of education in like solving political problems. I do think obviously there's space for books like your first one, like educating people about like microaggressions, like quite basic stuff, right? But I think there's a danger that from the left you come across as if you are you're know-it-alls and you're trying to educate people. It's this belehrend, like talking down, because there is always this dynamic in education of one teaching and one being taught, and I think people get frustrated with that.
But I feel like that's an attitude problem with the left. I think it's not like the education within itself. I feel like it
doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be, because I come from, like, what I'm thinking of is kind of like from my American side, Black American side, there was always this question of like kind of like quotidian communal education, My uncle sits me down. He tells me about the civil rights movement. He tells me about all these people. It is a little bit annoying, but in a way, it is also very beneficial. And they're like these old heads that will always kind of like, that are so quick in kind of like telling you something about history, something about that. And I think there are like, I also see it in different cultures that it's like really normal to kind of like, and something kind of like noble to kind of like educate people in like this, not in
an institutionalized way.
Yeah, not in an institutionalized way, more like in a cultural way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to be academics. Like it's like but here I feel like in Germany, education is really tied to class, and it is also a habitus problem.
Yeah, it's like it's about showing who you are. It's identity. It's like
Exactly, and it's like, and I've I don't know. Before I studied journalism, I was at sports college, so it is
what's Sparks College?
sports.
Sports, right?
So I
Sorry.
studied sports. So I graduated, and then I actually didn't enter the academic field. I feel like and I'm very glad that I have that experience being with people who are not really interested in academic questions, and so to kind of like see how do you. It's not that political questions are not discussed there, or people don't find solutions there, or don't participate in these questions. It's just kind of like a different approach or a different language that they use, and they might not know about, kind of like the canon or something, but they know about the ideas. They can maybe attribute them to the right authors and right thinkers and stuff. And I feel like sometimes people are occupied with that a lot. And I always feel a little bit, even though, of course, now I'm kind of like associated and attributed to the intellectual class, but I still kind of feel like a little bit of a, like, I don't know, imposter is not the right word, but kind of like
someone who's barged
it's
in.
like I got it. Yeah, I kind of like snuck in. It's like I don't know. I don't have the same experience in
True.
a lot of people.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people who are, let's imagine like the kind of archetypal German leftist, they probably have academic parents, and then they go to university, they may be involved with like SDS or Linksjugend or something, and then they get a job as a Referent at the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, and then they, with actually very little kind of contact with working class people of color, because these spaces are so white and elite, are then expected to kind of educate people on struggles that they have no idea of, like in terms of lived experience. That's not to say they are all doing a bad job, but it certainly changes how they might approach and how they might talk to people.
Yeah, and there is like a little bit of an like leftist ideas in Germany are also a little bit of a identity thing.
Totally.
So people, I feel like it's oftentimes for people it's like identity first, so they don't really have a motivation of like really letting everybody know or letting everybody in. There's kind of like always what I find interesting. I also
subcultural approach.
Yeah, I already see it with the left gaining popularity again, that there is kind of like this impulse for many leftists to then be against the left part, Die Linke again, because it's like if it grows in popularity or if it becomes mainstream, then it's inherently bad. It's a bad thing. It's ruined.
Yeah, because a lot of leftists are like, their identity is about their kind of nose piercing rather than about. I'm sorry, I just looked at your nose piercing when I said that. No, but let's say there's, if we're talking about archetypes, then there's also like the particular, and this is for me as a Brit really like this was kind of a bit of culture shock because we don't have like a subcultural left in the UK. If we did, it would be like the trade union movement. It would be like old working class, like. From the mining, and so we don't have this kind of like, I remember I went to a party once and I was wearing something Nike, I think, and someone was like, oh yeah, that's like a right-wing brand, we wear Adidas. And it's like, it's so weird to me that a different capitalist brand would be the leftist one,
Yeah.
Like, and it's run by it's owned by like ex-Nazis, like the Dassler, Adi Dassler, the owner of Adidas. And so what is leftist about? It's just has the left just become kind of an aesthetic?
I think many things have become an aesthetic. I feel like it's kind of like or let's say, I feel like a lot of things have become a lifestyle more than a political movement. So people, if they take on politics, it's more individualistic. It's more like, how do I live my life? And what kind of like, and that also extends to what do I want to wear? What places do I go to? Who do I want to hang out with, be associated with? And and then you live a leftist life, but you don't really, and that might even require that not everyone finds out about your politics. So that's kind of like self-sabotaging. It's like you will, so I think, there is this interesting thing about the left that they promote inclusivity but they are very exclusive.
Right. Yeah.
They want the things that they want, they don't really practice. And that's the dangerous thing with the right. Because, I mean, I haven't been to a right-wing event, but I remember...
I have, actually.
Yeah. And were the people nice to you?
Quite
no,
often,
because you were a reporter, maybe not. But
no, they were actually okay.
But if you
depends on,
I think if you'd be just like a person who's like looking for, like, you are trying to find you kind of like are dissatisfied with how things are, and you look around and you see who's welcoming you. I think dangerously, oftentimes right-wing people are better at saying, like, doesn't matter who you are, come in, even though that is something that the left thinks they are doing, but they are not, actually.
But they're doing it only in the right way, right? I mean, there's this famous phrase, the left look for traitors and the right look for converts. I think that's kind of what we're discussing here to an extent, right?
Yeah, true. I mean, I feel like since the left is actually, they want integrity. I understand that this integrity is not a value in right-wing, for the right wing.
I see what you mean. Yeah. I mean, obviously you don't want to welcome in even, very violent or problematic or whatever people, right? So you have to have some boundaries. But I feel like the hair splitting on what problems are is quite self-sabotaging. I also think, for example, there's a lot of discussion around Palestine and stuff like that. And I feel like a lot of people, they'll see something happen inside Die Linke and they'll be like, well, I am never joining Die Linke. They are traitors. And then the Die Linke will do something that's they're a bit schizophrenic on this issue, right? But then they'll do something positive, and all of the so-called anti-Deutsch, ultra-Deutsch, we call them on this podcast, they will be like, okay, I'm staying in Die Linke and I'm going to make life hard because this is actually this is the way that I achieve my political goals of sabotaging human rights, right?
Yeah, I mean, you do. I think it's just, I don't know. I feel like if you have a strategy, just follow it. But I feel like that is where
I feel like there is
Germans
no strategy,
are very,
right?
Exactly. They're very flip-floppy, and and I think that is also embedded into the German kind of like...
They like nuance.
But people are also very much very easily manipulated. They're like, kind of like, I don't know. I feel like you can be loved and hated very quickly. Like, just, I don't know. I feel like people don't have just kind of like a
stable viewpoint.
Yeah, a stable viewpoint that they then from within, they kind of like can differentiate or find out how bad or how, like, is it a deal breaker or not? Like, I don't know.
Sure.
And I feel like everything also gets kind of like reviewed in these, maybe that is also a social media thing, but they always get reviewed in these brackets. Yeah. So this quote by this left guy goes viral, and now we hate them all because it's like a stupid thing they said. And then...
Have you had any shitstorms yourself? This is quite often.
Yes, I have.
Yes.
But that is a long time ago. It's like 2020. I feel like I'm not and I'm glad that I'm not kind of like that kind of like avatar anymore in this kind of like social media Hunger Games, political Hunger Games. I don't know, but it's like
well, you talk about that in Identitätskrise, about how like this book that you wrote basically became your identity for a few years, right?
Yeah,
that was what everyone knew you for.
Yeah, exactly.
Must be weird.
It was very weird. It was also weird because it was in a time where everyone was at home, including me. Like, it was lockdown, so there was already a kind of like warped, distorted sense of connection and community and like other people, and I just kind of like saw the gain in popularity was like followers, like gaining followers, and like, but it wasn't that I was actually meeting them or seeing them. And I was kind of like, I had online readings, and sometimes it's so absurd because sometimes there were like 5,000 people in like I would never read in front of a 5,000 people audience, right?
Yeah.
But then you would have that online. But it feels like you're at home by yourself. So all that felt like really weird. And then, of course, I wrote the book in 2000, or it came out in 2019. And I did not expect for the Black Lives Matter movement to become like a central talking point a little bit more than half a year later. I didn't expect to play a role in this moment in Germany either. So all of this came also very unexpected and also kind of like threw me off in a way.
You were kind of like an accidental overnight success in a sense.
Yeah, in a way it felt like, yeah, like becoming, like, how you call it, like being viral, becoming viral.
Yeah, going viral. Yeah,
Going viral.
yeah,
Yes. Even though it was a little slower than that, but it felt like it, and it had like different waves. And then also it was all tied then to somebody dying in Minneapolis, which was also, it's hard to kind of like comprehend or in any way feel good about, if your attention and success and everything comes from like a murder that everybody suddenly becomes very interested in. And
I wonder, I actually wanted to ask you, why do you think that this murder that happened so far away is what galvanized people, whereas murders of black men that happened so much closer to home, most people don't talk about, And so there's Uru Jalou, famous case, but that was quite a long time ago now, where the police were, he was found kind of burnt to death in his prison cell. And there are more recent cases which we've already talked about. Like, I wonder, and I have a bit of a cynical perspective here because I was working for a German public broadcaster at the time, and a lot of people who would never criticize the police were saying, oh yeah, George Floyd, oh, this sounds like a great demonstration. Do you think that Black Lives Matter took off because it was almost seen as a protest against US racism rather than German?
Yes, definitely. I think I feel like, of course, during the pandemic, questions of injustice and feelings of like not being able to be self-determined and people just taking things away from you, like this kind of like, I feel like these feelings were very close to people during that time. Like people were just like, they felt a sense of injustice that didn't even have to do with George Floyd or racism in America, but there was like this kind of like boiled up anger and like this. So I think that was part of it. Then I also think there was, we can't forget about Hanau, and that was in February of 2020. 9 people got killed by a racist and in Hanau. And then the pandemic came and people kind of like didn't have any opportunity to really like mourn or express themselves or address anything. And it was also in a very German manner, was kind of like saying, oh yeah, this is like a individual case and this was very tragic, but it's not like we don't have to kind of like open this discussion of like structural racism or anything like.
And I mean, of course, racism played a role there. Like I think, because in the case of Hanau, it was in a kind of shisha bar, right?
Yeah.
Right-wing terrorists kind of went in and there had already been issues of the local council blocking the fire exit.
It was definitely a racist, like there was different, also from the side of the police, that there were already that the entrances were locked because of I think because of police searches that have been going on at that bar before, which then resulted into them being unable to escape. There's many aspects of racism in there, but like the first and foremost one is that the guy, like the shooter, was a racist. But that like horrifying incident, kind of like there was no national kind of like mourning or kind of like grappling with that. And then
they went to carnival the next day in like Cologne, which is not that far away. I think Dusseldorf as well, perhaps. And so, thousands of people, tens of thousands came out for a murder in Minneapolis, but a mass murder in Germany was very quiet. And actually, I believe many of the family members of those killed in that horrific attack have actually been persecuted by the authorities here in Germany.
Yeah, and and it's like they've been many of the family members of the victims there are kind of like were threatened by the father of the shooter and stuff. It's like a lot of stuff going wrong during that time. But I feel like there was a bottled up anger also within many people when then George Floyd came up. And then there's this movement in America that already articulated certain things that Germans struggle so much finding words for, finding like really pinpointing the problem. So I feel like a lot of people just kind of like use this as kind of like a projection or something to kind of, to
more wide anti-racist activism kind of thing.
Yeah, and then it was kind of like also like a kind of like mass movement, like how it also works within Germany. Like if enough people say this is worth standing up for, there's more and more and more people coming without really thinking about it. And then I wonder about, I don't know, especially Black Americans, like the position of Black Americans in Germany, what it means in
because you have a really unique perspective in this, right? Because you're German and have African American roots.
Yes,
as well,
exactly.
Right?
My mom is Black American from Philly, and my dad is German from Düsseldorf.
Yeah,
and I feel like Black Americans, of course, have a big influence in pop culture and stuff. You know, they
globally, of course.
Globally, but I think also, especially in Germany, a lot of people, you know, just listened and were raised by like kind of like with their favorite artists being Black Americans. So there is kind of like always, and people grew up watching The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air on RTL 2 and stuff, and like many sitcoms. So people have like a perception. They think that it's like they have like an idea, a familiarity, and they think it has something. They feel like a connection. It's like soft power, basically.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
So, yeah,
I feel the same way because I think we're the same age, and when we were growing up, there was so many kind of African American sitcoms on TV, like the Wayans brothers, as well as Fresh Prince and stuff. And like I just looking back, so my brother especially, so much of the stuff he watched was just African American comedy, and I think at that point probably had never met an African American, right? And I think for a lot of people in Europe, it's probably the same.
Exactly, and then there's like it's all very complicated because most of the Black population in Europe, also in Germany, is not Black American. They're actually African. But then they had like a weird, especially in the 90s, they had a weird position, or even before, there was like this longing, especially in West Germany, to become more American or to kind of like appeal more American. So there were they wanted a lot of Black people in entertainment in Germany. So they took if you look at like, for example, like Euro trance music or something, there are a lot of like Black singers involved and Black musicians. Also on music like MTV and Viva and stuff. But they all had to kind of like appear or kind of like American in a way. The intention was to kind of like appear more American, even though.
Well, I mean, there was the famous case of Milli Vanilli, right?
Yeah, exactly.
These two Black Swiss guys who didn't speak very much English at all.
Yeah.
And they were chosen by Frank Farian, a very talented but very dishonest music producer.
Yeah.
Who was also the guy behind
Boney M. Yeah.
He was found out because they went to the American Awards. I think they won a Grammy or something.
Yes.
And then press were asking them questions and they didn't speak any English.
They didn't speak English. Yeah, exactly. But Milli Vanilli is a great example. Like so it's kind of like weird. I feel like Black Americans or Black people, and then like the idea of Black Americans oftentimes then kind of like Black people not from America, but also were part of this. I feel like there was this longing at some point to kind of like shed yourself from like this German identity and become like this part of like the new like Western US American influenced identity that's just like people are so tired of their Germanness. And I feel like there was like this longing for, or like looking at Black people and kind of like Black Americans kind of like admiring them.
Right, but in a way that was sort of tokenistic,
Definitely,
rather than embracing diversity at home and talking about and like accepting, because there's a huge Turkish population. At that point, now there's been a lot of Arabic people and more, but back then the main minority was kind of Turkish, I would say, in West Germany especially, and there was never really this sort of embracing of Turkish culture.
No.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah, and there is no genuine interest. There was never a genuine interest in Black people. It was just projections, things that like, it was tokenism and stuff. Like they were not really people had, and still have today, like weird ideas about what Black Americans, who they are, what they're going through. Also, their struggle becomes so romanticized and stuff in Germany.
Yeah.
And if they really would be interested in, the Black American struggle or like the ideas of liberation, then they would have been able to transfer that to their society. But Black Americans, for Germans, present an opportunity to talk about racism, police brutality, all these like horrible things without talking about themselves. And it's like this group where you can say our police brutality and these people and like these, how can you act like this? How can you treat people like this without having to look at themselves, because they feel like they aren't part of the oppression of Black people. So I feel like it presents for them an opportunity to talk about it and not talk about it.
Right.
At the same
And
time.
that's so interesting, because there's a bit in your book that I really enjoyed about so-called brown babies, because there were actually African Americans, in a sense, in Germany after the war.
Yeah.
In the kids of GIs, basically, of like American soldiers, mostly American. And they were not kind of tokenized. They were not treated very well at all, were they?
No. So there was this big discussion, like after World War II, there was people kind of like understood, okay, we shouldn't be hostile towards Black people. We should be kind of like sad for them because they don't belong here. Like these poor babies, like they don't.
Yikes.
Like it's not the climate for them. Like literally thinking like it's too cold for them here and stuff. So they had like you can read like
I mean,
you can
it's too
read
cold
this,
for everyone, but yeah.
but it's like there was like this like they were portrayed as like these tragic lost people. There was also this movie, I think I forgot. It's like a 50s movie about like a little Black girl who kind of like gets adopted by this German family, and then but by the end, the Black American father comes and gets her and brings her home.
Right.
There was like this whole sentiment of like these poor, they don't belong here, these poor brown babies. So there was like they were taken away from their mothers. A lot of times the GIs, like the fathers, had to weren't able to stay in Germany, or they had to go to Korea, or there was like also kind of like pushes for them not to build families. So oftentimes it was like white single moms. They weren't, and then oftentimes people just took them away from their mothers, or sometimes the mothers were pressured in giving them away. So then they ended up in orphanages, and from these orphanages there were programs to kind of like give them away to adoption, either to the US or to Denmark. And they still are around today. You can find them, you can talk to them. They are in America. I don't know much about the people who were sent to Denmark, but that was the way of like, the attitudes kind of like, or the results remained the same. They didn't want Black people in Germany. They thought it was a bad idea to have, especially to have mixed race people, because it was like, because then it becomes messy. You can't separate it anymore.
Right. Rather than having the kind of Gastarbeiter who live in their ghetto.
Exactly. They can like just stay over there. But like, so, and during World War II and even before that, there were also babies of like colonial French soldiers that came in World War I. And their children
occupying the Rhineland, basically, right?
Exactly. And their children were part of this big campaign called Schwarze Schmach, like the Black Shame. And they were, at the end, a lot of them were sterilized during Nazi Germany. Like not everything is documented, but there are like maybe around 400 cases that have been really documented. But there is just, that wasn't all gone after.
Because they were sterilized because they were seen as a threat to the Volksgemeinschaft.
Yes, to the Volkskern. Yeah. And it's like, so there was.
So what I find interesting, I did know about the Schwarze Schmach, because there's also this kind of there was this coin that was made,
Yeah.
which was like a very racist portrayal of an African. And I can't actually remember why it was made, but it was like a protest against the French occupation, and the French occupiers were portrayed as Black Africans, basically.
Exactly, and like because the French sent soldiers from their colonies at that time, it felt like for Germans, it felt like a humiliation. Just like, you're sending us your like colonial, like it's like
you're not even sending us proper Frenchmen.
Exactly, like you are sending us Black people to rule and all over us. This is like humiliating, and this is like and then the Schwarze Schmach really was a campaign. If you look into it, like a lot of money went into that, and it was also kind of like made up and curated with the help of the US. So there was also a connection there. If you kind of like...
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And so I think that says something, right? That like we've had these discussions about, or we're supposed to have had these discussions about race. And, I've been in Germany 8 years or so now, and I only learned about the brown babies from your book not so long ago, and Schwarze Schmach, because of this coin that that just appeared on my timeline at some point. I think there's a lot of ignorance around these issues, right? People think, well, the Jews obviously were the main victims of the Nazis, but there were, of course, Black victims as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, people in Germany have this perception of like, yeah, well, I mean, anti-Black racism is not really a thing in Germany because there weren't any Black people,
right? And that's why they usually use that as a reason to justify saying like the N-word Kuss or like all of these chocolates which have the German version of the N-word in there.
Yeah, exactly. So
but it clearly was always there. This anti-Black racism.
Yes, like as a narrative, it was always there, and there were Black people there who were kind of like, who this racist narrative was like, they used it to persecute them or throw them out of the country. And there were, it's like a small amount, but there were still Black people ending up in concentration camps also. They were persecuted. They weren't part of German society, and they were never intended to be part of German society. Yes, the focus wasn't on them that much, but the narrative around them, that is very, very old. And I feel like you also have to kind of like look at like, sometimes legislation changes, but narratives don't change. Societal narratives don't change. And if you have them now, the Black population increases, that still, you still have these, that becomes an issue. Of course, you can say like, for a lot, like, this may be a philosophical question. It's like, if people are anti-Black and there are no Black people around, does it matter?
Right. Yeah, I see. Yeah, like the tree falling in the forest of racism.
Exactly. But yeah, it doesn't go away, and you see it today, and of course you also have these narratives are also not like clean cut, and only Black people are kind of like target of these narratives.
It's not like the US where it's, Black people are the principal minority group.
Exactly. So
although even that's changing in the US with kind of demographics and Latinos and...
Yes. So it's also interesting because you kind of like see, Germans kind of want to make it seem as though like, yeah, there's this racism in the US, and then and we don't have anything to do with it, but they do talk and look at each other and kind of exchange ideas and concepts. So the anti-migrant sentiment that has a long tradition in Europe and also in Germany also now is transferred in the US, and then vice versa, and everybody and all of them have belief in the...
Well, of course. I mean, famously, Hitler was inspired by Jim Crow and these kind of laws, right?
Yes.
I think sometimes that's overstated the extent, but like this idea of racial segregation, apartheid, and speaking of apartheid, West Germany was one of the few countries that continued to support South Africa during apartheid.
Yeah.
So where this German idea that we don't have anti-Black racism and therefore we can say the N-word Kuss or whatever, like it just seems absurd, and especially when you look at surveys, there was one last year, I'm sure you saw it, that said that Germany and Austria were actually the worst countries in Europe for anti-Black racism.
There's also, because it's not, people don't want to really address it. And there was, I think, even when the World Cup...
And there's a lot of Nazis
there are a lot of
right?
Nazis. I think when the World Cup was, or in Germany, there were also the UN gave out like some like no-go zones for like Black people that just like
Oh, really?
dangerous. Yeah, I think so. I have to look it up
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
but I think there
Interesting.
was also warnings and
Right.
that there are certain areas in Germany that are dangerous for Black people, and like you don't really hear about that, or that doesn't become a scandal, but it is.
Yeah,
It
I mean,
is.
it should be. I mean, going back to Joe Cialo,
Mm.
who, you know, there was this case, Görlitzer Park, of course, is this kind of racialized issue in Berlin
Yeah,
politics,
yeah, yeah.
right? Because actually, you know, and I, in a sense, I sort of understand. If you have grown up in a small like part of Germany, you might never have met any Black people, and then you come to Berlin, and the only ones you meet are drug dealers. Most of them are West African refugees, right, or asylum seekers, however you wanted to define it. And then there was this, and so the CDU, they're always wanting to build it's like this long running debate. They want to build like a fence, yeah, around there. And then there was a tour after, I think there was a case of a gang rape in the park that obviously was kind of blamed on people there. And Joe Cialo went along, and he was actually stopped by police and asked to, you know, show who you are. And you know, for all the criticism of Joe Cialo, he does not look like a drug dealer, or you know, yeah. So,
but the thing is, in a way, if you wanna say like the thing is, maybe he does like if you kind of like, so
I just mean
depending, like he looks like the people selling drugs in the park. He does, because
in that sense,
they're, but of course, you know, he's wearing like a neat shirt and they are not, blah blah blah. The question is like, what do you factor in to differentiate
the difference
who you have in front
there,
of you?
effectively, right?
Yes, but like what I'm trying to say is that like a lot of people a lot of Germans do not differentiate between. I feel that I have felt that when I was growing up, like they don't the indicate, like people think, oh, this is a Black person and therefore they're like the people in the park or anything. Mind you, also I feel like this is important to say, the people that you meet in the park selling drugs, they're also whole human beings. You know, they're also people who have gotten to Germany in some way. They probably didn't think they would end up selling drugs in a park. I don't know in what situations they're
I actually interviewed
in.
a guy for Vice who was doing that. This is quite a few years ago now. And yeah, he of course he didn't expect that. He's a trained mechanic, car mechanic.
And they have, you know, they have lives and they have stories and everything. So kind of like, I also think it is also wrong to dehumanize
and stigmatize
them, and kind of like just think like, oh yeah, they're drug dealers in some way that makes them it makes the like not like hating them or dehumanizing kind of like justified. That's it's also kind of like a dangerous thing, but like but since there is a stereotype, or people think that's the only kind of Black person that exists in Germany, of course, then Joe Cialo will also feel that
he gets the blowback.
Yeah, he gets the blowback. So, and yeah, this could be in one, like a source of solidarity, kind of like if you experience that, this is what that is basically the positive idea of identity politics. If you kind of like think, oh, if it happens to me, we kind of like have to have a solidarity because they think we're all the same. But that's not what, in the case of Joe Cialo, that's not what's happening. But that's, I think, the idea, like the original idea behind.
Although I almost have a bit of an issue with that mode of politics, which is kind of linked with intersectionality, because it is this idea like the intersectional struggle in a sense is linked to this idea of like we're all minority groups and our struggle is your struggle. I'm like, I'm a white cis man, those are not, like, racism is not my struggle, but I care about it out of solidarity, not because it affects me, right? So sometimes I'm not convinced of this idea that like we're all affected. I just think, you know, sometimes some things are a question of morality. Like racism is obviously bad, and it doesn't actually need to affect you for you to care about it.
No, definitely, yes.
And then I also think that approach of like building alliances based on lived experience can exclude majority groups in a way that causes or contributes to that backlash, right?
Yeah, because I feel like there is a kind of like a wrong interpretation of like the intent of behind it. Because I think lived experiences require certain, like collective lived experience requires certain, or there are certain needs that come out of that. You know, especially for minorities, if you feel like certain feelings of isolation, of being misunderstood, of like having a disrupted sense of belonging because of the discrimination you are experiencing, then it is necessary and very important and maybe life-saving to get together as a community and kind of like exchange these experiences and feel seen and understood and stuff. That is all very important. But when it comes to that is not the same as finding political answers or politically organizing. Sometimes I feel like these things get mixed up. That like a lot of people, which is also a problem in the left, that a lot of people try to find like solve the feelings of belonging and hurt and everything within political organizing. But that sometimes is like, I feel like sometimes these are two separate things.
Sure.
You know?
Or just in comment sections or whatever, right?
In comment sections, yes.
I believe I did an interview with someone who was also a white man, and like we were accused of, I think it was either white fragility or white it was something like that. And because we had discussed, you know, immigration politics and I feel like sometimes there's this approach of we are trying to lift up black people, therefore, and this was a white woman, by the way, who accused us of this, baselessly. There's this approach of like, we want to lift up black people, therefore we have to like put down white people. And you know, I obviously recognize that white people are very privileged. Like that doesn't need to be said. I'm just not sure how helpful it is in terms of building like an anti-racist society to like insult majority groups in terms of building allyship, you know?
Yeah, I have like a yeah.
Because people like me are just going to think this one person's an idiot, and then like people maybe who are a bit less woke than me will say like, okay, they want a race war, let's bring a race war.
Yeah, I think at the end, that's I think where the problem lies, because we're kind of like mixing sentiments with analysis of, or like feelings with an analysis of power structures and everything. And of course, on a theoretical level, I can say like, you're more privileged than I am.
Sure.
Well,
you're a best-selling author and I'm not, so.
Yeah, but like, let's say on like, if we enter a room, you present an idea, I present an idea, maybe you're taken more seriously than I am, whatever. So
depends on, yeah.
But like, just lived experiences.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that is maybe, that might be true, but we can't like say, oh, this is guaranteed. It's just kind of like
more likely.
Yeah. It's more likely. It seems like there is a bias, a sexist, racist bias that would play into your favor and to my disadvantage.
Yeah.
Okay, but then we are still individuals. The question is like, how do we find a solution for that on like on an individual level? And that then becomes like sometimes a little bit tricky, because then I can't really say on an individual or personal level, I can't say, well, I'm kind of like being discriminated, so my feelings, my sentiments are like more valid, not valid, I feel like, or like
more factual.
And I think it's also an advantage. I feel like a lot of people do that a lot of time, that like they, it's also like a kind of like a trick from the right to kind of like always push the discussion or the about race into this realm of sentiment, because that is where that is basically unfair to say your feelings count less than my feelings, or that you will have as many feelings as I do. Like there's no.
There's almost this approach sometimes. It's like you're from these privileged groups. You need to take your lumps, like because as a way of making up for historical injustices. And I'm not convinced.
But I also want to say, I also think that like I sometimes feel like a lot of people felt very insulted by my book title, for example, and a lot of people just think it becomes a lot. This is also the whole anti-wokeness wave discourse. It is not about racism anymore. It is about being accused of racism. Like that is like the big problem now, or that becomes the issue, and like the insult that like is that people might say, "Oh, you're racist," and you feel it's unjustified or something. But is there really that like? Then I sometimes wish we put all of the feelings aside, and just kind of like talk about the actual thing.
Sure. Facts don't care about your feelings too.
Yes. And I feel like feelings we also need as a society, a better strategy to discuss feelings, because as much as politics nowadays are driven by emotion, it kind of like to me seems that we haven't figured out a way how to actually navigate and talk and like different feelings.
Yeah.
And that now becomes like a kind of like,
and if we focus feelings, then a lot of people will like focus on their feeling of resentment or the fact that they feel like they've been told off by you or your book when they actually haven't, right?
Exactly. Because the thing is like, I don't want to pretend. This is also a little bit of a power structure thing. Because as you say, maybe you're not like, I think I will say racism affects people, everyone. It also affects how you move through life, but in like a sort of advantage or in a certain way that causes not a lot of friction. So, so I feel like, I forgot where I wanted to go with this, but like at the end of the day, I feel like if we then discuss race, like let's say we talk about racism, let's say theoretically you wanted to discuss the N-word and why that is that really a bad thing to say and stuff. And we would discuss it, and for me it becomes a more emotional topic because I have certain things associated with it. It makes me angry, and now I am the emotional one. So like, that's also sometimes it just on a personal level, it just doesn't work to, especially for the people that experience the discrimination, to just say, and then you could say, well, you're getting kind of emotional, even though factually, I would also have good arguments on my side, but to kind of like argue that is also causes maybe a bigger exhaustion. So you also have to factor that in, I think.
Definitely, and I think it's something that. It's not like a zero-sum solution, right?
Yeah.
And I hope that we are getting better at having these conversations without it being seen as like an affront to anti-racism, to, question it. Because I think one issue maybe is that a lot of this kind of quote-unquote woke stuff came in quite quickly. And people, if they didn't catch up to it in time or didn't understand something, many of them felt that like bad about it, or that they were made to feel bad about it. And I think some of that is probably quote unquote white fragility or something like that, but also maybe a communication and a style issue of this choosing sides. Like, and I mean, there's a very good book about this by the British Asian journalist Ash Sarkar called Minority Rule, and she's one of the people from Novara Media, and they've kind of moved away from woke. They're calling it post-woke now. But the point is, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The fact that we can have a discussion without, hopefully, it being tarred as like, whatever kind of, and lack of sympathy towards anti-racism. Hopefully we can, question where things could be done better, and that's what we've done in this conversation as well.
Yeah, and I think also like certain things are just a process. I feel like there was in 2020, especially, and maybe even the years leading up to it, there was like people are so, there was a sensitivity in a way. There was like, people, especially also on the internet, people are exploding on like certain issues, and I also felt it. Like I felt like a certain anger. If you kind of like, if there is like this period where a certain understanding kicks in, and then you see it everywhere, and you have like this kind of like maybe like woke puberty, I guess, and you're just in everything of
and you want to go around
everything is
people.
political.
I did that with vegetarianism, so
and we saw it also.
I've been there, I've done that, and I was so annoying, honestly.
And people, and I think the Me Too movement also kind of like worked in that way, that there were also like all of a sudden like every little issue was kind of like a discussion. But I think it is part of the process to kind of like have this, anger years where everybody's just like, and it is maybe a little bit of a hard time for the privileged groups that are accused of benefiting from these systems. And there's not quite a lot that you can do in that moment that, like, I don't know, maybe it's just like there needs to be, or maybe there's a long of like emotional maturity to kind of like think.
I just hope we could all approach each other with, compassion and respect, like regardless of whatever group we're a part of.
Of course. I mean, that's the goal. I mean, that's also the goal of anti-racism and everything.
It should be, right?
Yes, definitely. I mean, but the thing is, like, I feel like the question is also like, where are you looking to have certain discussions with whom and everything? And also, especially in Germany, I feel like people aren't really good at selecting that either. People are thinking like, you're a Black person, you can talk about racism.
Yeah, this tokenism.
There was a tokenism, and there was just like, and also the things I was requested to talk about, like racism in medicine, racism in this period of time, history, blah, blah, blah. And the thing is, like, just because I kind of like wrote a personal book about like certain aspects of my life and racism doesn't mean I know everything about racism. I'm the spokesperson for everything.
Right. You almost became like the Beauftragte for anti-Black racism.
And there's kind of like maybe also a little bit of a laziness to kind of like really try to get to the bottom of this and really to find the people who you can talk to. And then also most people don't just want to know, also like it's at least in the media, people just want to know how it feels. Like there's also like this sentimentation, like the emotional thing.
Which we haven't talked about yet. And I did actually want to ask you a question of just not what does it feel like, but what were your experiences like that led you to write your first book, growing up as mixed race, biracial in Germany?
Yeah, it's such a general, so hard to kind of like sum up my experiences, but
so a lot of your book, a lot of points made in your first book are these kind of, which you said earlier, don't ask people where they're from just because they have a different skin color, or don't touch Black people's hair, stuff like that.
But I want to elaborate on don't ask for people where they're from. Because people get so mad at that, like criticizing a question because they're like, I'm just curious and blah, blah, and now I'm not going to ask anyone ever again. That's not what I mean. It means like people approaching me, and before they even say anything else to me, they ask where I'm from, or they guess where I'm from. This feels like weird, and it feels as though, and then also oftentimes the reaction when I say my mom's from the US is also weird because they expected me to be something. Like they expected me to say Brazil or something, and they have like a projection of like some exotification of.
But where did you grow up?
I grew up in Cologne. And I have two older sisters. I grew up with my mom and my dad, and my American grandmother. She was also there. So I feel like that is not very typical of a biracial person growing up in Germany. That they have like. Or at least at
like
that
multi-generational family.
Yes, around. And so I've considered myself, in that sense, I consider myself very like privileged. And
because you still had like a lot of contact with your American family, basically.
And being from the US, just like structurally, it's not hard to get access to the US, It's like there's like just going there is also not that hard. If you are from sometimes it takes more organizing if you are from a country that doesn't have that passport privileged and not that
good and the soft power that you mentioned earlier.
Yes, exactly. So in that sense, a lot of issues were also like I was privileged in that sense. But the general sentiment was that, my first idea of racism was that, of course, it exists, but it's something that exists in radical form, like Nazis are the racists, and everybody else is not racist. They might like say something clumsy, but it's not like a big deal.
Yeah, I think Germans can be quite clumsy anyway to everyone, right?
Yes.
Like that. I respect it in a sense as someone who is a little bit emotionally clumsy sometimes.
So that was my idea. And then there was also, of course, coming from like I had like of course, an understanding that there was like a struggle for liberation, and but that was all over. Like that was in the 60s and 70s, and we did it. And now we live in a society where people are
Post-racial society.
Post-racial, or like, yeah, it's not going to cause any disadvantages. But then, of course, quickly, like you kind of like learn that that's not true. Like you start to navigate the world, but it's all wrapped in like a thing that you can't really talk about. It's hard to pinpoint it and to speak about it. So this is, I think, why I wrote my first book, to kind of like put a language on these very many ambiguous situations, because most of the experiences I have in my daily life is not hostile in the way that somebody is like, you are Black, I hate you. Like that's not what's happening.
But that does happen as well, right?
I mean, that does happen, but not like as frequently.
I have a Black German friend who I met. We met traveling, and when I moved here, like I just remember seeing on Instagram, like, yeah, she was told to go to a concentration camp while just riding her bike in Berlin. It's insane. So obviously that stuff does happen.
Yeah,
but that's not the main way that you experienced.
Yes, and I feel like some like people kind of like they yelling stuff at me on the street and stuff. I kind of like that definitely happened to me, but it didn't feel threatening, and in a way kind of like, or it didn't feel like it didn't make me feel very unsafe. It made me feel like, I don't know, there was maybe a little bit of resilience and naivete that kind of like made me go through
You were
the
in
world.
Cologne as well, which
I
is
was
a
in
big
Cologne.
city.
Exactly. It's a big city.
In the West as well. I don't know if it's probably better, right?
I think so. Like, I think there's a different, like, there's just like, because the self-perception was also like, oh yeah, we're so like open and everything. And so there was this kind of like mix of course, people were racist, and they were like, in the 90s, they were also a lot more racist than they are, or like,
things they said, right?
Things they said there were different times. So people have learned in the last 35 years, but what I also mentioned before, there was also this weird kind of like fascination for Black people. I feel like people loved a lot. There were a lot of white people who just loved when I played with their friend because they wanted their kid to have a Black friend. Wow, kind of like that, like these progressive liberal things, that it's also something like kind of like rainbow romantic.
That was the era of United Colors Benetton, these multiracial adverts
exactly.
and stuff.
Exactly.
We had I actually grew up in Southeast Asia, and we had such a different view of the world back then, like kind of hopeful. And then from my perspective, it all changed on 9/11. Right, like 80s 90s kids, like thought the world was getting so much better, and then boom.
That's basically kind of like the storyline of identity crisis. It's like, I feel like I've really especially being born in 1989 in West Germany.
Same year as me.
Yeah, and that was kind of significant year for Germany, It's like, and there was kind of like this hope, especially in the West, to be like, and now we're expanding our great system to everywhere, and it's just great. The Cold War is over. It's going to be great.
Yeah, there's this chapter about the end of history coming.
The end of history, and I feel like 9/11 was the end of history, for me at least. Like, it was kind of like this big glitch and like warping of the idea of like, wait, what's
people
happening?
Hate us. Like, that was what shocked me at that time, age 11 years old, I guess. And it was like, okay, so there are people who hate us, and I don't really understand why.
Exactly.
And maybe the world's not this like fair place, like it's thought, and actually maybe the future's not so bright, and look where we are now. And then there was, and I think 9/11 really politicized me also in this kind of like, I was like very much, I hated George Bush. I was against the Iraq War, and there was like the first demonstrations I went to was like, that's kind of like, I think that was like the first time I was like
I witnessed, or I was kind of like participating when I was like a
Political.
teenager. Yeah, I was like 13, 14 when the Iraq War started, and like going to demonstrations and stuff.
Yeah, same. I think, people nowadays, I get a lot of comments on Twitter, especially, which is like, oh, the Germans are always on the wrong side of history and stuff. And I'm like, no, actually, in the Iraq War, like Germany and France refused to get involved.
Yeah, and that was so interesting because it was kind of like because in Identity Crisis I talk a lot about the West and how, like, for Germany, especially post World War II, there was kind of like this trying to catch up to the West and kind of like becoming part of the West again, kind of like proving themselves that they are also the West.
Yeah, not the Central Powers anymore.
Yeah, and then by 9/11 they had like, there was like a little bit like for a brief moment there was like this confidence of like, no, we don't need the US to kind of like,
we're Europa.
We're Europa. And that, where is it now? No one knows. It's gone.
Well, I think I actually know. I think what we're seeing now is kind of a new Europa-centered foreign policy, right? Because of the US basically being with Trump not like a reliable ally anymore. So I think we will see more. My prediction is that in future years we will see more of this kind of Europe-centric rhetoric and also politics, right? Because Germany is rearming in large part because the US has said we're not going to defend you anymore.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically what they. Yeah. What else are they? I kind of like see. Looking at the developments, of course. I mean, with arming themselves and stuff, that is, to me, that is horrifying.
You're scared by it? Or?
I mean, the thing is, like, it's kind of like, of course, it's not the same, but it is, to me, like the Patriot Act, like arming, like building or investing in the army is kind of like the Patriot Act of these times. It is because people are like, all right, we have to do it now to kind of like being able to kind of like defend ourselves and make this more safe. But then it stayed, and it kind of like caused like mass spying on the public. And it's like, people, you don't have a plan of, okay, but what happens after? Then we just have like just a super armed Europe. And do you think this is maybe at some point, hopefully, Russia will stop their aggressions, not only in Ukraine, but like, I'm just going to be optimistic on here. At some point, this will be over. Then we'll have this army. There's also the fact that there will be a lot of migrants coming because they're not going to be able to live where they live now.
Because of climate change. Because
climate change will also cause more wars. Because like all of that won't, like, it's not realistic to think that this will stop anytime soon. Then we have this big European army. Who do you think, or what do you think is going to happen with that combination? And that's what I am worried about.
I understand that point. I think I would be less worried about German rearmament if it also wasn't at exactly the same time that the AfD are number one in the polls, right?
That's the thing, exactly. And not only in Germany, but also everywhere else. There's a shift to the right, and there's like
more of this fortress Europe of like keeping migrants outside, refugees outside. As well.
And the EU is already in the hands of like in many parts in the hands of right wingers. So it's not a good time. Like, you kind of like wish for the time that was like 10 years ago, where people had like these European hoodies that were kind of like cringy. But do you remember this?
I remember them, but as a Brit, I hated them. Not that I'm pro-Brexit, but they were just cringe.
Yeah, and thinking of like having a critical like colonial perspective, there's like a lot of like, you can't just be like, Europe is great. Like you can't like, but
that was literally the time when Alan Kurdi and all of these migrants were dying on Europe's borders, and still are, in different ways.
Exactly, but there was like this this fight about what is Europe going to be, and I feel like the Europe hoodies were like, had like this liberal idea of like, we can be, at least they thought we can be a continent, or we can be a union at least that is pro migration, because they were demonstrating against the AfD. That is now over. So it also had like the movement had a lot of problems, and I think because they didn't address certain things, that is why it's it also failed.
Mm.
But
and the EU is actually not that sexy, right? Like the idea of kind of cooperation between nations, sure. But I actually did work in Brussels as a journalist there for a little while, and it's like very bureaucratic. It's very institutional. Yeah. It's like a lot of people on the left in Britain, by the way, were pro-Brexit because they said this is a capitalist club. There's this line that the EU was it's the only constitution in the world with capitalism written into it, and just in general, like, Ursula von der Leyen, is this really like an inspiring leader? Like, I actually think she's not the worst on some issues, not the worst EU leader.
Because the bar is so low now. Because, I think, the EU was founded to regulate trade and everything. So it didn't have democracy in mind. So you would have to have, if you want to go. For me, I would wish that, like, if we go this route, which I understand I think there are points to be made that, we can't really go back, like, just...
With the EU?
With the EU?
Rearmament?
Yeah, no, with the EU, basically, that, like, people, I know, like, in 2001, people, like, there were people who said, like, the euro is a bad idea and all of that. And there was the euro crisis and everything, but we can't go back to that. We can't go back. So I think maybe we have to kind of like be more, make the European Union kind of like address it full on and make it more democratic, not only a capitalist, like, I don't know, maybe it's me
but that
believing in reforming.
Sure. I mean, that requires nation states to give up power, though.
Exactly.
They might also end up giving up that power to international banks or whatever. Right?
Exactly.
What people like. Actually, when you speak to bankers or lawyers, a lot of what they want is a currency, united capital market, and that would allow them to trade more quickly and more aggressively, and probably give ultimately rich people more power in society.
All of that can only happen I'm not even for, if we want to be one global thing, then we have to do redistribution first. Like, nothing else would, like, and I know that's not what these capitalist people want. It's exactly the opposite. They want more wealth concentration, wealth accumulation.
You mean like global justice of like redistribution to the global south?
Yes, maybe then they have to. Then there's like at least cut their debt and at least do that. Like, I don't know. I'm not good with global economics and stuff. But at least, like, if you can't. It's not even that I'm against an idea of cosmopolitanism and like global whatever, because we already live in a globalized world. Maybe that, like, in theory more, maybe that would be something that we're heading towards, but then we have to make sure that everyone gets a chance in having a dignified life and having the possibility to participate in this global big whatever democracy, AI-led democracy. I don't know how we could imagine it.
I don't think we're going in that direction.
I don't think, no, not at all. No.
And actually, your book is quite a lot about this idea of the West and like leading the way, and these questions like development help, of course, Live Aid. Do you remember all of this stuff? Like, one of the chapters is about kind of how the West felt like they needed to save the world through development help or cooperation, as it was rebranded to in Germany. But I feel like the West has now realized, like, we've actually missed the boat in terms of development economically, and we're not the like rich people anymore, is how it feels, because societally we're not,
Yeah, we're not, but
like, if you look at certain rising powers in the Middle East, on the Gulf, in Singapore, then it actually looks like we are being left behind. And China, of course, being one of the big ones here. So I think one issue is that actually, talking about debt, I just saw the other day that I think it was the UAE and Saudi Arabia actually cancelled Syria's debt. So this idea of the West, like, maybe we need to stop thinking about how important we are. I say this inspired by, I went to talk by Pankaj Mishra a few days ago. And actually, I think this idea that we are the protagonists of history has also got to change.
Yeah, exactly. And initially that is also the West brought that on to themselves. If you kind of like think, oh, we're the West, we bring democracy, equality to everything, then you kind of like are having a concept that would actually kind of like dissolve you, because how can you say we're the best because we believe in equality more than everyone else? It's like, but if you believe in equality, you can't say you're better than anyone. So like, what? It doesn't really make sense. So and that now like they're that in a capitalist logic that other countries are kind of like trying to grab the the power that the West held for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
That also makes sense, But I think more than kind of like saying, they're not like the economic power that they used to be and everything, I think my worry is that the West also, that like the narrative that the West has or the identity that the West has, they didn't live up to it. And we saw it with 9/11 and the aftermath of 9/11. We see it now with what's happening in Gaza. Like these kind of like just ignoring that you're going against the things that you've established or you say you lived by this universal human rights and all this stuff, and you don't live by them, that will cause a disappointment and a disruption in trust that is hard to fix, and that will leave that will leave a vacuum, and that will leave the door open to what we're seeing now, like to fascism and totalitarianism. So I'm kind of like, even more than like economics, I'm concerned about that, about the moral, actually, because I feel like that is also kind of like so obvious that this is now just like a scam and like a facade, and there's nothing really there to really address that or to really go back or to try to live by these like great ideas that the West has about themselves.
Yeah, and one of the best things that came out of the kind of post-war era was international institutions and later on international law. And I think you mentioned Gaza. I think it's quite clear that that actually is quite toothless. And we have the Chancellor of Germany inviting Netanyahu, who's wanted by the International Criminal Court, to Germany and saying, well, we wouldn't arrest him because he's Israeli, so law only applies to some people. Alice Hasters, thanks for a great conversation. We're out of time.